Muslim ban that we saw at the end of January, and they're going to challenge it in the courts the same way they did that first ban. Obviously, the Trump administration took into account some of those legal challenges. They crafted this order somewhat more narrowly. They didn't talk about giving preference, say, to religious minorities when they began reprocessing refugees. They took Iraq off the list, where there was a lot of objection from, say, the Defense Department about not allowing Iraqi translators who had been granted visas to come into the country and settle here. And so there it is circumscribed, but there's still going to be legal challenges primarily on whether this is in effect a Muslim ban because of the countries covered and are going to violate freedom of religion here in the U.S.
And the politics of it and the kind of political scenery and showcasing today, Anthony. So no great thing with the president in the Oval Office. We saw the three senior figures there in that news conference. What do you make of that and the way this has been presented in contrast to the first one?
I think it's fascinating. It seems like the lawyers have taken over the process rather than the political operatives like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, who were reportedly the people spearheading that first rather broad, vague ban that was issued within the first week. I think Trump administration officials feel like they still have to do something, that if they didn't do anything and just let the courts bog down that first order indefinitely, it would be perceived as a campaign promise that was not fulfilled. But the fact that they're doing it on a much quieter level here, that Donald Trump didn't even do a public signing, that he put his administration officials to answer questions that happen on Monday and not at the end of the day on a Friday, they're being much more careful, but they want to have at least something that they can claim as an accomplishment on the immigration issue.
And given how busy the president's been on social media over the past few weeks, Anthony, anything around this again in terms of his activity and what he's saying, is he being unusually quiet?
After Saturday morning's outburst on Barack Obama and wiretapping, he has been relatively quiet, just a few tweets on Sunday morning. But yes, he's backed down a lot. So I think he may let this order speak for itself. He was very active in defending that first order, talking about how important it was that it happened immediately right away, because otherwise people would sneak into the country. Now this one has a 10-day delay, so it's a difference. I don't think he wants people, putting up his new tweets defending it versus his old tweets and nitpicking the differences. We'll see if that lasts, however. If there's a fair amount of blowback and criticism, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes to Twitter and is a little more aggressive.
Just to pick up on one thing again, Anthony, if I may, because lots of people obviously still interested in the events of the weekend and the way that the Trump attack on Barack Obama played out. How do you assess that today, and what's been the kind of considered view on that a few days later?
Well, there's still a lot of concern, particularly in Congress, about it. Obviously, his tweets changed the dynamic of the debate in this country and the topics of conversation to much more about these unfounded, at least at the moment, allegations about the previous administration. I know Republicans in Congress had planned on this being a week where they would focus on health care reform and Obamacare repeal. Now, on Monday morning, they're having to defend their president or explain their president or back away from their president in many cases. It's changing the message, it's undermining the message. So I think that the travel order is going to change the subject a little bit, but I don't think it's going to wholly change the conversation away from Donald Trump's Saturday morning tweets. All
right, Anthony, good to talk to you again. Thanks very much for the latest there in Washington. Anthony Zurcher, my colleague there in Washington. Now, let's have a look at the headlines at 17 minutes past 5 here on BBC News. Trade unions calling on the government to fight for British jobs at Vauxhall after the car manufacturer was bought by the French owners of Peugeot and Citroën. President Trump has signed a new ban on travellers from 6 mainly Muslim countries after the US courts blocked his original order. In the UK, 13 potential terror attacks have been prevented in almost 4 years. That's according to counter-terror police. The public is urged to be vigilant.
In sport, Manchester United's Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Bournemouth's Tyrone Mings have been charged by the FA with violent conduct. Mings appeared to stamp on the head of the United forward before the striker caught the defender with an elbow to the face moments later. Arsene Wenger has denied reports Alexis Sanchez was involved in a training ground row in the lead-up to Saturday's defeat to Liverpool as speculation over the player's future grows. And after facing criticism over its makeup, the FA table a series of proposals to improve diversity. They include reserving 3 places on the FA board for female members only. I'll be back with more on all of those stories and a full update at around past.
Now, the latest developments in the French presidential election. The former Prime Minister, Alain Juppé, has announced today that he will not be a candidate in next month's presidential election. There was growing speculation that he was preparing to step in to replace François Fillon, the current centre-right candidate, who's been under massive pressure in recent weeks because of allegations of wrong use of public money and corruption in effect. Joining me now from Paris to talk through the latest developments is Pierre Aski, former deputy editor of the newspaper Libération and now CEO of the independent news website Rue 89. Pierre, thanks very much for coming in. I'm just wondering, what should people make of the current state of this race, given that Monsieur Fillon is still there, despite all the kind of forecasts, if you like, that by today he would have been gone?
Mr. Fillon has managed candidacy in an amazing. Yesterday, he had a make or break event. He organized a big rally in Paris, and the rally was big enough to make him feel that he could continue, big enough to convince people that the real problem today is that there is still nothing convincing in the right-wing party that that has nominated him that he can win. And so there are still a lot of discussions after Mr. Juppé has decided not to run to see how to deal with it. The problem is that Mr. Fillon doesn't want to leave. He says, me out. That's what he said on TV last night. So it's a real deadlock for the right.
It certainly is. And I'm just wondering, when we look at the kind of people involved, 3 big figures, Monsieur Fillon, I mentioned Mr. Juppé, and of course Monsieur Sarkozy, who's had some things to say as well. What do you make of his role in this?
Godfather, you know, though he lost heavily in the primaries, he lost in the first round of. He's still someone who carries a lot of weight. He has a lot of followers in the leadership of the party, and obviously the fact that he was the former president gives him some extra weight. So at the moment, there is really a key role for him in trying to keep the unity of the party. 3 very radically different factions in the party, and the unity of the right is really in danger. And you could hear this morning how deep the resentment and the bitterness is within the Republican Party.
Pierre Aski, good to talk to you, and thank you so much for coming in today. Pierre Aski there talking to us in Paris. Little glitch on the sound, for which we apologise, but we certainly got the full message that Pierre was giving to us there on the latest stage of the presidential campaign in France. It is now 21 minutes past 5. Police say that 13 potential terror attacks have been averted in the past 4 years in the UK. The UK's most senior counter-terrorism police officer has also revealed that more than 500 investigations are being carried out at any one time. He disclosed the figures as he launched an appeal that aims to get members of the public to report any suspicious behaviour that they might see. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports now.
Checking on a huge bag of fertiliser he planned to use for an Al-Qaeda bombing campaign against nightclubs and shopping centres. This was Omar Khayyam in 2004, unaware that he was being watched by police. A woman working at the storage warehouse had tipped detectives off, potentially saving hundreds of lives.
If you have a concern about something you've seen or heard that could identify a terrorist threat, report it.
A new police campaign reminds the public of the important role they have in fighting terror.
It could be anything that strikes you as unusual.
Detectives say that in 1/3 of the most high-risk recent investigations, information from the public has helped. In the background are the devastating attacks in mainland Europe, the trucks driven into crowds in Berlin and Nice. The mass shootings combined with suicide bombs in Paris and Brussels. All so-called Islamic State or Daesh attacks, inspired or even controlled from a distance.
We see increasing use of encrypted communications which can instantaneously and dynamically link terrorists across the world. that brings about a greater danger for us in our communities, that somebody in our community can be influenced by somebody working in a terrorist stronghold on the other side of the world.
Counter-terrorist police are working with a threat level of severe, which means that an attempted terrorist attack is considered to be highly likely. It's been like that since the end of 2014, and there is no sign of the level coming down in the coming months or even years. An analysis of where most convicted terrorists lived has identified London and the West Midlands. 1/10 of all those convicted in the whole of the UK came from just 5 wards in Birmingham.
It's not surprising that big cities like London and Birmingham, which have very large populations, very diverse populations, pockets of deprivation, will have a significant number of terrorists. But that shouldn't take away from the fact that actually a terrorist attack can take place anywhere in the country.
Police said today that they'd thwarted 13 terrorist attacks on Britain in the last 4 years and are currently running around 500 counter-terrorism investigations at any one time. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at New Scotland Yard.
A 79